Morning Girl, Chapter 9. There was still no top on our house, and especially at night, it was as though we were fish circling in a secret pool whose banks were so steep that the only things we knew about were water and the flat roof of sky. It had been a long night of waiting, first for Starboy. Mother, Father, and I usually didn't talk much when we ate our meal together, but my brother always had something to say. Without him, the silence was very loud. Once, when a bird cried out, and later, when the breeze knocked at the wall, the three of us turned our faces toward the doorway, ready to not notice that Starboy had finally given up his stupid game. Then, when he didn't appear, we pretended that we had moved for other reasons. Father lit a smudge fire to keep away the insects. Mother shifted to her knees and checked that there was water in her drinking bowl. I scratched my head. After the sky disappeared, I thanked Mother and Father for my food and went outside, as I always did before sleep. This time, however, I did not walk into the bushes. Instead, I followed the voice of the waves to the beach, where of course Starboy was waiting to be found. I told him that we were worried about him, but he was stubborn and refused to listen. I thought I might remind him of the stories told to small children about the giant starfish who creeps ashore at night, but since I had to go back on the path alone, I decided not to bring up such tales. At home, the circle of embers burned red in the center of the room. Mother and Father quickly looked behind me when I appeared at the door, and I saw the disappointment in their faces. "Well, I found him," I announced. "Is he with Red Feathers?" Father asked, his frown anxious to be sent away. Before I could say no, Mother interrupted. "You know Red Feathers is staying at his uncle's?" she said in a voice that meant more than the words. I watched Father remember the news that I swam too far had shared, along with some of his catch, when he visited earlier this evening. Nobody had to talk about what everyone already knew, that Red Feather's mother and father were arguing with each other again. "Did Starboy tell you how late he would be?" Father wanted to know. "Did you say we had saved his food for him?" "Probably his stomach is still full from yesterday." I spoke before I could stop myself, and Father bit his lip. He was about to reply when Mother picked up her bowl and poured water around the edges of the coals. "Sleep now," she said through the smoke. Her voice was not exactly angry at me, but it was not proud of me either. More waiting, more listening, more wondering as we each lay awake, our thoughts woven together. Starboy filled the house by not being inside it, just as I thought he had hoped to do. After a long time of quiet, Mother moved softly past me, slipped outside. Afterward, Father turned where he lay, and now we began to wait for her too. There was no hope of sleep. I would almost doze off when I'd hear Father stretch, swing slowly to his feet, and make his way to the doorway. I imagined him looking into the night, listening for the beat of Mother's and Starboy's feet on the path, straining for the carry of their voices on the breeze. He'd remain that way so long that my mind would finally begin to drift. My eyelids would get heavier, the mat beneath me would become more comfortable, the dance of my ideas would sway, and then Father would clear his throat or mumble to himself, or bump my leg as he returned to sit in his hammock, and I would be completely alert. At last, just when the sky was turning gray with morning, usually my favorite time, I sank into a heavy sleep. The next moment, I heard real footsteps, and through the slit of my eyes, I watched Mother enter. She carried Starboy like a baby in her arms, sang a thin song into his ear, and gently settled him down onto his sleeping mat. He was so tired he hardly moved. Father leaned over and stretched out one arm to touch my brother's head, then Mother's hand. "The bugs have bitten you," he whispered. "Not badly," she said. Still, she let him draw her into his hammock, and I heard them talking softly together. Heard Father laugh at something Mother told him. It would be a late morning for everyone, except for me. I stepped over my mat very carefully and left the house. I set my feet into the hard, packed places, turned sideways to avoid the leaves of plants, ducked beneath low branches. From my quick dream, I chose the idea of water, maybe because I was thirsty, Maybe because the day was already hot and the thought of waves on my skin made me feel better. Maybe because the sea promised me a story. Smoke was not yet rising from cook fires, so I knew it was early. No wonder the sea called. It must be lonely, a feeling I could understand. Today, I was in no one's good thoughts. Starboy was unhappy with me, and now Mother and Father were too, for their own reasons. They would be distant toward me until I helped them to forget my unsisterly words. I wish there were someone I could explain, someone I could complain to, someone who would easily forgive me, either for being too nice, as I was to Starboy at the feast, or too harsh, as I was last night. I missed the new sister who had never come home. I was sure I would never have argued with her. It seemed to me wrong that she had received no name. Grandmother said that we hadn't known her well enough, and yet I did know her. She was in my thoughts often, as she was this morning. Then I had an idea so surprising that I stopped walking. I could give the new sister a name, just between her and me. I closed my eyes, held my breath, and found exactly the right one. She listens. Now she was real. I looked at the place where I was to remember it. The island was all green and brown, the flowers red and yellow, the sky a deep and brilliant blue. At my feet, the tip of something white stuck from the sand. I stooped, dug with my fingers, and pried out a small empty conch, washed so gently by the sea that not a single chip was missing, just the way Starboy insisted for the shells he'd like to keep. My gift would be the start of his new collection, replacing what the storm had borrowed. Things would be the way they had been, only better. I put the conch into a bowl of dried seaweed, where I could find it later, and ran into the water. Dawn made a glare on the ocean, so I splashed through the shallow surf and dived without looking. I felt the hair lift from around my head, felt a school of tiny fish glide against my leg as I swam underwater. Then far in the distance, I heard an unfamiliar and frightening sound. It was like the panting of some giant animal. A steady, slow rhythm, dangerous and hungry, and it was coming closer. I forgot I was still beneath the surface until I needed air, but when I broke into the sunlight, the water sparkling all around me, the noise turned out to be nothing, only a canoe. Their breathing was the dip of many paddles. It was only people coming to visit, and since I could see they hadn't painted themselves to appear fierce, they must be friendly or lost. I swam closer to get a better look and had to stop myself from laughing. The strangers had wrapped every part of their bodies with colorful leaves and cotton. Some had decorated their faces with fur and wore shiny rocks on their heads. Compared to us, they were very round. Their canoe was short and square, and in spite of all their dipping and pulling, it moved so slowly. What a backward, distant island they must have come from. But really, to laugh at guests, no matter how odd, would be impolite, especially since I was the first to meet them. If I was foolish, they would think they had arrived at a foolish place. I won't make a mistake, I told She Listens. I won't be too good, and I won't say too much because I might choose the wrong words. I kicked toward the canoe and called out the simplest thing. Hello! One of the people heard me, and he was so startled that he stood up, made his eyes small, as fearful as I had been a moment earlier. Then he spotted me, and I waved like I've seen adults do when visitors arrive. My fingers spread to show that my hand was empty. The man stared at me as though he'd never seen a girl before, then shouted something to his relatives. They all stopped paddling and looked in my direction. Hello? I tried again. Welcome to home. My name is Morning Girl. My mother is She Wins the Race. My father is Speaks to Birds. My brother is Starboy. We will feed you and introduce you to everyone. All the fat people in the canoe began pointing at me and talking at once. In their excitement, they almost turned themselves over, and I allowed my body to sink beneath the waves for a moment in order to hide my smile. One must always treat guests with respect, I reminded She Listens, even when they are as brainless as gulls. When I came up, they were still watching, the way babies do, wide-eyed and with their mouths uncovered. They had much to learn about how to behave. Bring your canoe to the beach, I shouted, saying each word slowly so that they might understand and calm themselves. I will go to the village and bring back Mother and Father for you to talk to." Finally, one of them spoke to me, but I couldn't understand anything he said. Maybe he was talking in Carib or some other impossible language. But I was sure that we would find ways to get along together. It never took that much time, and acting out your thoughts with your hands could be funny. You had to guess at everything and you made mistakes, but by midday I was certain we would all be seated in a circle, eating steamed fish and giving each other presents. It would be a special day, a memorable day, a day full and new. I was close enough to shore now for my feet to touch bottom, and quickly I made my way to dry land. The air was warm against my shoulders, and there was a slight breeze that disturbed the palm fronds strewn on the ground. I squeezed my hair, ran my hands over my arms and legs to push off the water, and then stamped on the sand. "Leave your canoe right here," I suggested in my most pleasant voice. "It will not wash away, because the tide is going out. I'll be back soon with the right people." The strangers were drifting in the surf, arguing among themselves, not even paying attention to me any longer. They seemed very worried, very confused, very unsure what to do next. It was clear that they hadn't traveled much before. I hurried up the path to our house, but not before She Listens reminded me to take the white conch shell from the seaweed where I had left it. As I dodged through the trees, I hoped I hadn't done anything to make the visitors leave before I got back. Before we learned their names. If they were gone, Starboy would claim that they were just a story, just my last dream before daylight. But I didn't think that was true. I knew they were real.